submit an application. And so without further ado, I am going to introduce our moderator, and she will introduce the remainder of the panelists. And so today our moderator is Dr. Tahira Reed-Smith. She is a professor at Penn State University in mechanical engineering and engineering design, and the associate department head for inclusive research and education. She is also a co-founder of Black in Engineering. Her research involves the quantification and integration of human-centered considerations in engineering systems and/or the design process. Her work is funded by the National Science Foundation, Procter & Gamble, and the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. Her projects involve the intersection of diversity and mechanical engineering, have been featured in National Geographic, NBC's Today Show, Essence Magazine, Reuters, and the National Public Radio. Her story about her double Dutch rope invention is featured in 2 children's books and was on the 2017 New York State Common Core exam. Dr. Reed-Smith obtained her BS and MS degrees in mechanical engineering from RPI, a PhD in design science from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and a postdoc at Iowa State University. So once again, here is our wonderful and phenomenal moderator, and I can't wait to learn more about our panelists.
Thank you, Bree, for the kind introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for those who are here today. Thank you for those who was here last week and you came back for part 2. But let me go ahead and introduce our distinguished panel. Thank you all panelists for making time today. Some of you yet again. So our first panelist that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Sunny Ivy. She is an award-winning assistant professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at the University of California, Berkeley. And she is a principal investigator of the Air Quality Modeling and Exposure Lab, where she is an emerging leader in the areas of air quality modeling and applications and community scale air pollution exposure assessment. She earned her PhD in environmental engineering from Georgia Tech and was a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Physics at the University of Nevada, Reno, and was a visiting scientist at NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory. Her research interests lie at the nexus of air pollution, science, and engineering and environmental justice, and she partners with community organizations to prevent the over-industrialization of already overburdened neighborhoods. Next, we have with us Dr. Aziza Belcher-Platt, a licensed psychologist providing culturally responsible individual and group psychotherapy, family therapy, and psychological assessment. She treats various concerns and she specializes in racial, cultural issues, trauma, and grief. She was inspired to get into mental health to contribute to efforts to make therapy more acceptable, accessible, and affordable, particularly for marginalized communities. Social justice and liberation are an indelible part of her work. For her patients, she aims to eliminate barriers, structural and otherwise, to seeking and receiving quality and culturally competent mental health care, especially for underrepresented and underserved communities. As a practitioner, she strives to help the field and practitioners become increasingly more culturally aware and responsive. As a scientist, she focuses on health disparities and evidence-based research to inform culturally responsible clinical practice. Next, we have Dr. Elizabeth Briady. She's a cultural anthropologist. She's the founder of Cultural Keys, a consultancy that helps organizations transform their culture and improve their effectiveness. She has had a longstanding interest in organizational culture and change, both in the US and globally. Her projects have spanned many industries, including automotive, healthcare, research institutions, aerospace, insurance, consumer products, and petrochemicals. She currently partners with the firm Relations Research on projects in the private sector. Briady also serves as the co-principal investigator on a 5-year NSF RED grant, Revolutionize Engineering Education. Prior to establishing her consultancy, she has had an illustrious 24-year career as an anthropologist at General Motors Research. In 2020, she was honored by the Society for Applied Anthropology, the Bronislaw Malinowski Award for Lifetime Achievement. She's past president of the National Association for the Practice of Anthropology and completed a 3-year term as secretary of the American Anthropological Association in 2021. She now leads the Anthropology Career Readiness Network, which brings together more than 20 anthropology associations and 400 volunteers to improve student career preparation. She has some books out, a recent book called The Cultural Dimension of Global Business, now in its 9th edition, and then Cultural Change from a Business Anthropology Perspective and Transforming Culture, which was awarded the Robert B. Texer Award for Excellence in Anticipatory Anthropology from the American Anthropological Association. She holds a master's and PhD in anthropology from the University of Texas, Austin, a bachelor, and she was Bachelor of Arts, magna cum laude from Wheaton College, and a French baccalaureate mention bien. Next, we have Dr. Colin Heisey. He earned his Bachelor of Engineering and Master's degrees in Chemical Engineering from the University of Dayton, where he was part of the Multi-Ethnic Engineers Program, and a PhD in Biomedical Engineering from The Ohio State University in 2018. During his PhD, he was a graduate teaching assistant and a Whitaker International Fellow at CEIT in Donostia, San Sebastian, Spain. He then spent 3 years as a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, where he helped establish and run the hub for extracellular vesicle investigations. He returned to the Ohio State in 2021 to join the inaugural cohort of Legacy Postdoctoral Scholars and was recently awarded a Mosaic K99 R00 from NIBIB. He continues to develop applications related to micro-nanotechnology, extracellular vesicles, and machine learning, and strives to be an advocate and ally for DEI efforts in STEM. Last but not least, we have with us Anitra L. Rice. She is a licensed family therapist, and she's a mother of 3 amazing sons, Josiah, Jaden, and Nicholas. She lost Josiah and Jaden to depression by way of suicide in 2019 and 2021. With her greatest pain comes her greatest joy, being an advocate for the destigmatization of mental health in the Black community. Anitra is very passionate in her work as a licensed marriage and family therapist, educator, and mindfulness practitioner. Anitra began her nonprofit, the FOL Foundation, in honor of her sons. She also runs a small private practice while teaching parent workshops and working as a therapist in Detroit Public Schools Community District. But her greatest passion is raising her youngest and Earthside son, Nicholas. As you can see, we have a very distinguished panel. I'm excited to continue this conversation. And for those who are joining us the first time, the motivation for doing this 2-part series came from the passing of 2 PhD students. They're both Black students in chemistry. Weeks apart, the announcement came, and they're at 2 different universities. And so when we heard of one, it was like, oh my God, that's sad. And then we heard of another one. It was like, okay, what is going on? We need to talk about this. We need to really figure out what's going on. What can we be doing in academic spaces to see how we can support our folks, not just students, but faculty, staff, everybody who's in the space called academy. And so this is the motivation. And so last week we covered sort of how to be compassion advocates, and we learned a lot about self-compassion. We learned about the need for establishing programs, and maybe some of the individuals that attended last week could also share their takeaways. But biggest thing is that we need to keep having these conversations. We need to keep talking publicly about these things. And Sunny mentioned that several people contacted her in her DMs last week because of just what was discussed. And so at this time, I'd like to take a couple of seconds to just do a moment of silence to acknowledge these individuals that were once here and who are no longer here because of suicide. Okay, thank you. All right, so part two, our focus is on understanding and just better overcoming this culture of silence that exists in the academy. And the reason that this topic was part two, and again, sort of drawing inspiration from just some of the circumstances that may have surrounded the individuals that passed away, is looking at some of the systemic issues, the environments that we are in as academics that can sometimes bring harm to others or set folks up for very challenging situations. And so we wanted to really uncover this and dig into this a bit more. One of the things I like to also mention is that, you know, we are talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. And a lot of the stories that we hear of are often individuals that are underrepresented in their fields and or are subject to what I call social constructs that place them in these underprivileged positions or less privileged positions in society. Bree, if you could show that academic wheel of privilege. Two colleagues shared this with me at Penn State, and I thought it was just a really good visual of just sort of this, what we call this academic wheel of privilege. And so if you go to the outer edge of the wheel and move closer to the center, your privilege increases. And so you can see these broad categories on skin color, body size, religion and culture, career stage. I mean, you think about all these different things that make up a person or their lifestyle, that the further away you get from the center, the less privileged you are considered, right? And so we have to be cognizant of this in our spaces. If we're talking about inclusion and belonging, we want to be aware of the different things, and it may even be blind spots for people because we are living in a space, in a society where some of these things have been established for a long time, and we're trying to sort of break these patterns and break these structures that can hold some people back. And so thanks for sharing that slide, Bree. And so let's just get into the topic here. So distinguished panel, what made you say yes to be on this panel this week? You know, all of you have different backgrounds. What inspired you to be part of it? And for those of you that are coming back a second time, what inspired you to come a second time?
I can start. Yeah, I guess as a second time panelist, I came back because the culture of silence is really strong in STEM. So I'm an engineer, and I am one of the people that don't subscribe to a culture of silence. And so I thought it'd be interesting to know what other people think as well.
I'm happy to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Anisha.
Oh, thank you. Well, the reason why I came back is because of the importance of speaking up about mental health, especially with my two oldest sons. They were strong proponents of destigmatizing mental illness, especially in the Black community, and even more so, I would say that in academia. My oldest son, Josiah, was an academic. I just found out just a couple of weeks ago that he was a junior at Michigan State, but he was working with his professor doing grad level research, and the research that he was leading is being published in an academic journal. So I'm so proud of him. But a lot of his stress was, you know, when he was at school up at Michigan State. So, and that's where he took his life. So this is very, very important to my heart to begin to extend to further the conversations about mental health. So that's why I'm here for the second time.
I think following up on what Sunny said, the culture of silence is very prevalent in STEM. Something I've experienced as a PhD student and now as a postdoc transitioning into a faculty position. Part of the reason I'm here is just to learn, to make sure that I know what to look for. I know how to create the right kind of environment for the trainees. And I think recently, particularly the pressures of remaining silent, I've had a few experiences this year where there's kind of a conflict of interest between my self-interest and my career progression and speaking out against some of these oppressive forces. So trying to understand better how to navigate that. It's very, very tricky and nuanced. I think being here will help.
Who's next? Why did you come?
I'm happy
Dr.
to go. I mean, this is what I do day in, day out. And, you know, like you said, when you read the bio, I got into this field to reach our people and to make sure that we had good care and to help with the stigma. And the more we can talk about it, I think it's really important. We free ourselves, but we free other people. And so anything we can do to help people get the help that they need and to live a more free and healthy and happy life, I'm always here to support.
And I'm here because I'd like to share what knowledge I have about how culture works as a concept, as well as how organizational or institutional culture seems to work. I personally have a strong problem-solving bent. And I'm always, my day job involves working with organizations on the kinds of issues that they feel that they have, issues that need solutions. And this panel that Tahira and her colleagues have put together is somewhat of a parallel effort to my way of thinking.
Thank you so much. And so what would you all say is the definition of this culture of silence? Like what does it mean? What is your interpretation of that? And have you experienced it, or do you know someone that has been affected by this culture of silence?
So broadly, it is one that we are socialized to believe we shouldn't say when we're struggling, we need help, we shouldn't ask for help, we shouldn't go tell our business outside of the house, and that something is wrong with you if you need some support, or you're having thoughts of hurting yourself, or you're depressed, or you're anxious, or whatever that might be. And things have shifted a lot, but we have a lot of work to do. I remember when I first started going to therapy myself, and I tell this story all the time, I said, to some family members, like, hey, I'm starting therapy. And they were like, okay, tell me. Right? Like, good for you, but it was all whispering on the phone. There's no one around. And so it's sort of this idea of like, okay, fine, if you have to, but this is a big secret, and it shouldn't be a big secret. And I'm really glad to say that in my family, it's not anymore, and that people are much more open and have sought their own care.
I just wanted to say hi. My name is Renee, and I'm a STEM librarian at UConn. I'm also the creator of the UConn Wellness Library, which is we do events and mostly virtual library to sort of destigmatize mental health. Yesterday in the library, I did some tabling during finals week. And so basically, one of my missions is to destigmatize and start the conversation about mental health and let people know that it's obviously okay to not be okay and to talk about it. So that is where I have been to one ASCE conference in the engineering libraries division, but I'm not in the academic research, but adjacent. I mean, I help people research, but I'm not doing research. Yeah.
That's totally fine. And thank you for being here. Appreciate you being here. Anyone else? Culture of silence, what is it? And have you experienced it, or anyone that's been subject to the effects of that culture?
I believe that at the heart of much of it is shame.
Mhm.
This belief that something is inherently broken inside of me that is irreparable and that isolates me from the rest of humanity, and that no one will be able to understand. And so it breeds first the silence within of denial, and then it isolates the person from being able to connect within the community because they feel as though no one will understand, or that they are somehow beneath everyone else who are there. And just speaking, just culturally, especially, certain people will be more susceptible to this if they're coming in already at a disadvantage. And just thinking about the will that you showed at the very beginning, those who are on the margins, of course, if they're going through something academically challenging or just personally challenging or something like that, they already feel like they're on the margins, and rightfully so. But even more so if they have mental distress of some kind, whether it be just a strong frustration or a full blown diagnosis or disorder of some type. It further isolates them so that their voice becomes crippled in a sense. And so what we can do as a community is begin to talk about it, so that and have these shared experiences, so that people will see and know that, oh wow, what I am experiencing is normal, it's human, and it's a part of the academic path, that so many people experience this type of hiccup or frustration or something like that. And once they're able to connect with someone else who has a similar or shared experience, it begins to de-isolate them, where they can begin to see their common humanity in the situation.
Thank you for that.
Can I speak on this?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the way I think about the culture of silence, I heard my fellow panelists talking about how that reflects from the inside out, but I kind of think about the culture of silence as the outside in, and how we respond to external stressors. And so what I'm finding is that a lot of the mental health issues that I've experienced and that our peers experience, our Black students experience, our Latinx students experience, are simply their reactions to microaggressions, blatant racism, blatant discrimination. We have been socialized to think that it is our inherent deficit that is causing these things, and it's not. And it's not. And so by forcing marginalized students to internalize these things and take it on as a self-deficit, we are inherently gaslighting them to think it's their fault, and it's not their fault. We live, and I quote Bell Hooks, we live in a white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, imperialist. And our response to that should not be gaslit. These are the things that I refuse to be silent on. My voice has been strengthened since I've been at Berkeley, because I do engage with Bell Hooks. I engage with the Othering and Belonging Institute at Berkeley, and I refuse to internalize the harms that are being done to me. I don't deserve this. Our students don't deserve it, and we should speak out about it.
Yeah, and I agree with Sunny really quickly. I think that agree with internalization, and I think that particularly people without as much privilege, I often think people of color or people who are on visas who don't have a voice really because of the consequences. It's very easy for people in power to make them feel like any kind of experimental failures. In my world, an experiment fails. It's not that many steps for them to internalize that as a personal failure. And I think it's very easy for that kind of culture to lead to bullying, especially if there's no consequences. So I've mentioned right at the beginning, twice this year, I've seen basically what is blatant bullying, speaking to someone with cruelty. And I work with a lot of people at my institution, so hopefully it's anonymous enough. And so when I witness something like that and see them internalizing it, breaking down in tears in the middle of a workday, and it not being as absurd as it should have been, the power structures become apparent very quickly because, I feel like I can support this person, but, if I raise my voice too much, my career can be on the line. There's all these consequences that can happen very quickly. So like Sunny said, it can very much be outside in, perfectly good scientists, very nice people, and the power structure can make them feel worthless pretty quickly, I think.
Can I add to that? Maybe the perspective from anthropology could be helpful here because it might broaden things out a bit. When I think of culture, I think of everything that we have, think, and do as members of our society. And so it's basically the thought patterns that we have that guide our behavior. And those thought patterns come from our experiences, come from what we hear, what we learn, what we see, what we touch, what we feel. And all of those get codified into what we might call cultural rules. So an example of a cultural rule is it's probably okay for women to cry, but certainly not for men to cry. And it's not okay for anyone to cry if you are at the office, or if you are in the university, or if you are in a place where you are supposed to be expressing or demonstrating strength. So these cultural rules are really about expectations that others have for how the society operates or should operate. And so the task before us is, how do we change these darn rules? And you have already alluded explicitly to some of the ways in which you are working to change them. So one thing that I heard is through talk, through more events like this, through compassionate interactions with other people. So through your examples, your role modeling. And so I think that the goal here is to change the rules, and we will know when there's a change in the rules when we see the behaviors in society changing.
No, thank you for that perspective. Thank you everyone for all these perspectives. I think the internal ones are valid, the external, all of these, it's like these different dimensions of silence and how it can play out, especially in the workplace. So let's go back to things. I want to go back to something Colin mentioned, and I asked a friend of mine asked her permission if I could share, but it's just I know someone personally who they've been through some things at their institution, and people were silent about it. People allowed certain lies to be told. A lot of things went unchecked. And so my question is, how do we and just a comment that Colin mentioned about, speaking up and then, career impact, how do we deal with that where people want to speak up, but there's this fear or there's valid concerns about career backlash? It makes me think of that term whistleblower. I think that was used a lot in sort of corporate context. I feel like around environmental justice type type things. But how do we, so we're talking about having more conversations for the intern, but for those that can speak up or have the ability to, but they can't for whatever reason, how do we address that? Does anyone have comments or thoughts about that? Like, how do we protect people from the backlash? And maybe we could open this up to the audience as well.
So
yeah,
if I could to hear, one,
yes.
we need a cacophony of voices. Don't ever let somebody say, hey, this thing has happened, this is troubling, this is concerning, and let them be the lone voice. Speak up then and there so that they, one, aren't isolated in that moment, and it makes it harder to do some of what Colin was describing in attacking him. And that doesn't mean that there won't be an attack, right? But then we start to rally around people, right? We're stronger when we're together. The other thing is, you know, in the moment, like, you know, Sonny was talking about microaggressions. You may not always have the right thing to say, but I want you to know you can go back to it and say, you know, last week you said something, and I'm going to need to address that because it's been bothering me, right? Because what's happening is it's eating us up. One of the things I focused on in my dissertation was microaggressions. And I remember a participant telling me that something she had experienced 30 years ago when she had just started her career comes back to her every couple of months. And she replays it in her head and thinks about what she wishes she could have said then, right? So can you imagine the toll that that's taking on her by not speaking up? So sometimes there are going to be consequences. Sometimes we're not going to like the outcome. Sometimes we may not get it, but there is some utility to speaking up for yourself and also for speaking up for other people.
If I could share my strategy for those two events just really quickly. So at the time, it was very scary to say anything, especially at my career stage. You know, letters of recommendation are so important, letters of promotion. And my strategy has really been to find, and this is largely thanks to Dr. Monica Cox, training us to find our allies and accomplices, she calls them. I'm fortunate I've been at my institution for a while, so I have people who I have like a deep sense of trust with that I can kind of share how I'm feeling, so I don't feel like I'm just putting someone on blast and potentially exploding the situation. And I think for people in more senior positions who have power, making sure that it's known that you're an ally or an accomplice and that you're someone that people can come to, particularly for grad students and postdocs who are kind of scared of people in power to some degree. That's really helpful for us too, because then I know who I can go to. Currently, you know, I have like 3 or 4 people that I trust absolutely, and those are the people I confide in. But it's kind of scary to just, you know, whichever department they're in, go to the department chair. You know, I might not know these people, but knowing who my allies and are within my college, within my department, is definitely helpful.
I wanted to speak on this.
Yes.
So what can we do to fortify ourselves to be able to tell the truth about these situations? And so I have a couple strategies as well. It reflects what Colin just said, and that's trust. So I start with building trusting relationships with the people I work with of all nationalities, genders, gender identities. And so when people trust you and they know that you're coming from a place of care and empathy, they're more willing to receive the information that you're saying, whether that's calling out microaggressions or advocating for yourself. There is an establishment of trust so that the information can be received better. And the second thing we need to do is, unfortunately, we do work in these systems. So we have to show that we are valuable to those systems by doing the work that we're paid to do and being good at it and being passionate about it. So the people that receive the information see you as a valuable team player. Number 3, which may be contradictory to number 2, always know that we're not stuck in any situation. We are valuable inside and outside of our institutions. And if need be, if the current institution that you're in no longer serves you, no longer reflects your values and your mission, it may be time to go.
Wow, that was just amazing insight. I'm still trying to just process what you said, and I think it makes so much sense. I love how you broke that down, Sunny. I'm just, I'm still taking it all, and that was just really good. And I like the idea of finding your allies, finding your accomplices. And by the way, you mentioned Monica Cox. She has a whole program that she launched on how to train people to be accomplices. If I could find the link, or if someone does, please put it in the chat, because she's also one of the co-founders of Black in Engineering. And so I think that's a great resource in light of what we're talking about today.
I think it's called Stop Playing Diversity or something.
Okay, I have to get that link. Okay, yeah. So what else? How else can we, we're all here. Everyone is here because they're open to learning. They're willing to grow. So we're going to get off this call in about 45 minutes, and we go back to our respective places of work. And what is the first thing that we should be doing? Like, what's our first step to say, okay, how do we evaluate our environments and sort of determine that, oh yeah, I'm in a space that we need to be, there's a culture of silence here, or I see evidence of it, whether it's your department or your college. What might be the strategy when we get off this call in 45 minutes to even move forward?
One of the things in terms of changing culture, you got to change language. And so I really want to encourage people to, if you do this, stop using mental illness as a way of describing how you're feeling in any given moment, unless it's really a mental illness. So don't say, I'm spazzing out, I'm having a bipolar moment, oh, I'm so OCD. Don't do those things, because then that gets internalized. Somebody around you is listening and they're watching you make light of it. And they're thinking, ooh, let me be careful what I reveal to this person or around this person. So listen to the language that's being used around you all. Is it a place where you really can say, I'm having a bad day and I'm really stressed? Or if you are experiencing symptoms of depression, yo, I'm struggling here. I'm really having a hard time keeping my head above water. And that will be received in a way that isn't harmful or punitive. And also, even when we suggest to people to go to therapy, there's a difference between, hey, I think maybe you could use some additional support and it might be good to talk to somebody, and, oh, you need to go to therapy, right? So don't do the latter, because that also sort of contributes to people not getting the help that they need and not feeling like they can ask for it or speak about it.
What about policies? What are some things that we could be, we all could just check what's established at our institutions and our universities, but what if there's nothing there? I feel like there's some things in place, but not for every context. And how might we explore that? I don't know if, Elizabeth, if you had some thoughts on that at all. Like, how can we sort of do some things within an organization to get what we need in place?
Well, sometimes organizations, including universities, have groups that are composed of people working on a particular issue. So, for example, this group right here, it might be replicated in many other organizations. So it might be possible to call attention to whatever the particular issue is through that group, and have the group, rather than an individual, raise the issue with, whoever would be the appropriate set of people in that organization. I'm not necessarily saying that this is a way to be fully successful, because it's you just never know, but you might get lucky. And the benefit is that it's a group bringing attention to the issue, advocating for the issue, rather than a particular person that has been hurt or set of people that have been hurt.
Okay, then the next thing I want to ask about is for people who do speak up and face backlash, like maybe, Sunny, you talk about that, speak up and there's backlash, there's pushback, there's just like an avalanche of a response that maybe you didn't expect. How is there a way to foresee that? I don't even know how to frame the question, because I'm aware of someone that has experienced that, right? Speaking up, being bold. I know of two different people, because they speak up and they're bold, there's this massive pushback that they've experienced. How do we, and then others just start, and they might see that example, and then it's kind of like, I don't want to speak up. I'm afraid. It causes fear. So we talked about shame being a root of the culture of silence, but there's also this element of fear. How do we deal with fear? How do we overcome that?
I'll touch on backlash.
Okay.
Okay, backlash. So with the element of backlash, that is pretty much the public, your peers, your administrators scolding a person for telling what is supposed to be the truth. What I would recommend is for the people that need to speak their truth to really understand the element of time and place. Where and when to speak up. If it needs to be behind closed doors and speaking directly to someone that can actually make movement to protect the person, like a Title IX officer, the ombudsman, or someone's direct supervisor, if that relationship is trusting, I think that's incredibly important. That requires a level of diplomacy. Is that fair to the person receiving that treatment? No, it's not. There's a time to speak publicly, and then there's a time to advocate for yourself within your organization. And we really need to be real about that.
I'm happy to add a little bit to that. Like Sunny mentioned, if you're excellent at your job and you're still facing backlash, at least something I can do at my career level is kind of overcompensate with sponsorship. So if I see something like that happening, which just happened recently, combating whatever professional hits they may take by nominating them for awards, things like that can, at least to some degree, I think, help a little bit. And I think it shows that they're still valued, even just being nominated for things like that. It doesn't get to the root cause, but at least, it's something that someone even at like a graduate or postdoc level can do if they see someone who the institution is not treating properly, but they're obviously very valuable and good at what they do.
What about for grad students? And thanks, Trifinia, for this information you put in the chat. I think about grad students and, some of the power structures in grad school, right? Most of us who, if we have a PhD, we were grad students. A lot of, or masters, you were a grad student. But let's think about that dynamic, right? And I've seen this many times. I've had colleagues that, and we talked a little bit about last week, I have had colleagues that their definition of success is something that's not always healthy for students. And a lot of times, if you're an international student, or if you're, an underrepresented student, you sometimes can be subject to experiences that are just a bit much. That's the best way I can say. And there's times that I've been able to use my role to gently influence certain things that I've seen with students. But I just think about some of the challenges with not everyone has access to, say, a person like me or someone else that would gently know how to advocate for them and allow them to move forward. But where do grad students go? I mean, is it the same thing? They go to this ombudsman. And I've had people confide in me about experiences that they're having as students in and outside of whatever institution I've been at. And I know that advisor-advisee relationship can be a make or break one. I've seen it. I've heard stories. I mean, I've had friends that had, oh gosh, just lots of grad school stories of the crazy advisor-advisee relationship. What advice can we give, or how do we help those students? Because remember, the two individuals, we don't know everything, that all the stories of what happened with them while they were in grad school, but there's a role, and especially for those of us that have taken up the mantle to be professors and advise grad students, how do we use our influence for good? How do we help our colleagues who may be on a, I don't know what you want, a high horse, and their identity and self-worth comes from certain things that could be oppressive to students? How do we help in that space? I feel like I'm saying a lot, but hopefully you understand my question and where I'm getting. How do we help grad students? Because that space is, they're students, they're not in positions of power yet. There's someone who's a gatekeeper to get them from, you know, day one to the goal, which is a graduate degree. And sometimes they're having to manage these weird dynamics at times in their labs and with their advisors, committee members, all of those things. And last week we talked about, I think what we call it, sort of compounding events, like back-to-back events happening that could be stressors. So let me stop talking and let people chime in. The panel can chime in, maybe, and shortly we'll open it up to the audience. How do we help grad students?
As somebody who was that grad student in my program, at some point, you're going to have to make some decisions about who you are, what your values are, what you're going to accept, and what you can manage while you're just trying to get to a particular place where you're not waiting on somebody to sign off. I think about that quote, I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees, right? And so sometimes it really came down to, for me, I'm going to say something, and I'm going to say something for myself. I'm going to say something for any other grad student who's a Black woman or a person of color in this program. I'm going to say something for everybody coming behind us, because even if I pay a little bit of a penalty, and sometimes I did, and that's okay, I'm still right here where I am, right? It was better for my well-being, and I think it made it better for the community, and I felt more empowered. And sometimes you'll be surprised that people will respond well. They'll get it. Sometimes they won't. And so, you know, I think something that Sunny was saying earlier, Sunny and Colin were both talking about finding people you trust and allies. Go outside your department. Have somebody in the counseling center that you see so that you have that sort of support. Have people on campus who may be outside your department, but are people who are about it, who understand things, that you can have a number of allies so that no one person can bring you down. And of course, I mean, document things if you need to, and keep a paper trail. And I think sometimes we're afraid of playing the race card. And so people, you know, wait when things are happening before they go. No, make sure you start documenting, and you take advantage of the things that are supposed to be there to protect you, right? So that, you know, you have all that in your toolbox.
Yeah, I agree with what Aziza is saying. And as she was pointing out at the start, sometimes you, the individual, have to make choices that are very hard choices to make. Anthropologists spend a lot of time talking to people, and I've done my fair share of that in university settings. And I've heard some things, seen some things as well, and experienced things, which would make the hair on the back of your neck curl. So with organizations, unfortunately, we have a power structure. And sometimes you cannot change that power structure. It's too ingrained in how the culture of that institution works. The leadership is not supportive of a different way. And so you, the individual, can get caught. And if you are, unfortunately, one of those people, then that's when it's time to say, this isn't for me. I've got to look elsewhere.
Can I speak on the grad student experience? So I think my experience was probably like Professor Platt's. One thing, if any grad students are listening to this, what I want you to keep in mind is that you need to remember what you're there for. You're there for that degree. You're there for your papers. And you need to put your blinders on, and you need to be Ray Charles to all of the nonsense. Also, you need to treat your degree like a chicken wing, and you need to eat the meat and leave the bones at the door or in the trash. So this is probably going to require more focus and more tenacity than you've ever done, but don't leave that program without what you came there for.
I want to circle back, and someone in the chat talked about the international student experience. So here's another piece that I've observed, right? So we're in America, and a lot of us, we're able to speak in these ways because we're from, we grew up here at least, or spent most of our years here. We understand sort of democracy and rights. I've seen where international students will come and there's this they're subject to, they've come to get a degree, and sometimes they're subject to stuff, and they don't even have the pathway to think like this, to say, I'm going to speak up. And there, sometimes the level of respect is so high for the advisee relationship that there's bad behavior doesn't get checked, and they don't even have sort of some of the tools to even know how to say, this person's getting checked and this is not right. It's just like they just muscle on through it, kind of maybe what you explained, Sunny, just try to put the blinders on and just muscle through it. And maybe even culturally, there's pressure that if you're not getting it, it's similar, right? Something's wrong with you. Some of what you said earlier, Anitra, about something must be wrong with you. Hopefully I'm touching on this. Does this resonate with anyone? Because I feel like I've observed this myself with students and certain labs and such. How do we even help graduate students who are not from here even know how to think this way, right?
So I want to, I think sometimes it's not even so much that they may come from a place where they quite understand democracy and all those things. And I say this from my personal experience. I was in grad school when Eric Garner was murdered, and we were protesting, or there were protests after the verdict came out. And I left class to go join a protest. And one of my closest friends in the program was Asian, and she was an immigrant, and she was on a student visa. And like, I felt some type of way about the fact that she didn't come with me, because I know what she thought. We had these conversations. And afterwards she said, I can't risk being arrested at a protest, because if I do, the visa that I'm on, I'm going home, right? After all this investment in me being here to be in this doctoral program. So I want to acknowledge that, one, yes, to your point, Tahira, there is some ways in which people who are here on status that isn't as stable as somebody who might be a citizen get abused and taken advantage of in school, at work, what have you. But also that also may keep them from participating in ways and speaking up, because they are more subject to like their livelihood being ripped out from under them. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. Going back a little bit to what was spoken about just a little bit ago, I was thinking about locus of control. What is it that we can control, and what is it that we can't control? And so, yes, we will always have these external factors that's going on that we can or cannot internalize. And most often, a lot of times, we each of us have internalized different egregious acts against us, whether it be microaggressions or what have you. But the locus of control says I can control my thoughts, I can control my behaviors, right? And so even with international students, that's why I think these conversations are so important, and to normalize these conversations so that, one, that people who are advocates and allies can begin to let their voices be known so that people who really need their advocacy can connect with them. That's one thing. The people in power who are advocates, they need to, have a flag or something to say, hey, I'm here to help you. And so that's why these conversations are really important. And the conversations are important also so that we can begin to know what our internal power is. And when we are internalizing those microaggressions or different systems that has caused us to have these expectations of the culture at large and that aren't serving us well, it's important for us to say, wait a minute, I'm making this about me and like something is wrong with me, like I'm not enough, and that's not the case. And so the locus of control, how can we control our thoughts to know that so that we can take the meat and throw away the bone, so that we can say, you know what, this is crazy, but this is why I'm here. And so I'm going to do this. I'm going to concentrate on get these papers done and doing this research or whatever the case may be. And going back to what we talked about last week, the self-compassion piece is what is my relationship with myself as I am going through these different processes? As I am interacting with these different people, am I letting their opinions determine who I am, how I view myself, and how I view my capabilities? And when we are able to differentiate between these negative views of others and what our views are of ourselves, then we can take the meat and throw away the bone. Then we can say, no, that's crazy. But this person over here, they're an advocate for me, and I can, get what I need to get from them and be able to meet my goals successfully.
Thank you for those responses. At this time, I'd like to open it up for more discussion and interaction with the audience. Are there questions that people in the audience have? You can raise your hand so we could see you, or if you can't, you could put in the chat and we could read it off. But I'd like to engage the audience at this time. Thanks for hanging with us. Quiet audience. Yes, and say your name. You could come off mute. Is it Memuna? You're muted.
Okay. Yeah, it's Moemuna.
Maimuna. Okay. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. It was so great to hear all of you talking about this culture of silence. So I'm a doctoral student at Florida International University, and like one of my research interests is like exploring how university can support student well-being. So I did a study with how, like, what sort of recommendation a student might have for the university to support their well-being. And I found that like students do not basically see university as like one major source of support. Like they will turn to their friends and family, which is pretty obvious, but they will not university as one of the things. So one of the things they shared with me, like either there are too many resources or there is no resources for me, like more customized. So when I was presenting this information in a like engineering graduate showcase or something, one of the students basically asked me about like the popular culture, like whatever doesn't break you, make you stronger. So when we are asking them, talking about these wellness issues, am I asking students to be soft, like asking for help, seeking something low? So am I promoting students becoming more soft or something? And the discussion of this culture of silence basically reminded me of that question. Like when I'm talking about seeking help and then it's everything, students or maybe some faculty are thinking of it that we are not making students resilient. We are asking them to be more soft and seek help. So yeah, any thought on this?
Great question. So let me get on my soapbox. I think there are a couple things that are out there in society that are just absolutely wrong. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Biggest lie ever told. What doesn't kill me will make me stronger. No, that's not true. if I get stronger, it's because I choose to get stronger. That's a me thing. I'm not going to give credit to the thing that tried to kill me, right? So I think we don't shame people. We don't break people down into becoming better people. Support is what happens, right? Shame actually makes people feel weaker. And so it's one of those things where it's, for whatever reason, you have to go against the narrative in our culture. Getting help isn't a weakness. That's a strength. Being able to say out loud, hey, I need something. That's strength, because a lot of people can't do it, and it's really important. And it also bonds us together. People get something when you help yourself and you allow other people to you're vulnerable with them, they get something out of it too.
And just say too, I think the resilience term gets thrown around a lot, and I do think that most people with PhDs would say they had to be resilient to get it, but I think the context within a PhD is, an experiment can fail, a grant can get rejected, a paper can get rejected, and you're able to move on to the next thing. I think the disconnect is when you internalize those failures as your self-worth. So at least when I'm with trainees, I try to really disconnect resilience within the lab and within the submission portal, because you really do have to, let's see, engineering. Oh yeah, you really do have to have resilience in that context. But if you're just internalizing those failures over and over, and it's affecting your self-worth, that's not the kind of resilience I think that you need to be a successful scientist or engineer. So I think that building resilience is part of a PhD, but you have to be very careful about how you, the context you put it in.
So I have a follow-up. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to comment too that it's one of those phrases that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So if that's the case, then you, if you're able to, I would ask the person, what do you mean by that? And try to take the position of kind of a neutral, objective stance to try to understand where that person is coming from. And I think if you're able to do that, pretty soon you will see whether this is just an excuse on that person's part not to have to engage, or whether that person really believes what that person is saying.
Kim, you have your hand up.
Yes. So I wanted to go back to what Colin was saying about this sense of, well, not sense of, but anyone who goes through a PhD and you are building this, you have to have this, level of resilience. So one of the things that I have found, basically the space that I work in is, retention and advocacy in our graduate program. But what I'm hearing is that level or that notion of resilience is coming at a cost of having to take on responsibilities that they were never educated on how to do, like how to be a graduate student, how to take this feedback and turn it into something positive, or take this, those failures and redirect them into a more positive way. It's what I've been hearing is lost in this gap of understanding how to transition into graduate education, but also adulting is what the new word is called, adulting, taking the responsibility of learning how to, deal with life, but also understanding that this type of program, becoming a PhD, you have to understand that from the gate. It's a transformational experience. You're not going to go into this program the same way you came out. It's not that type of learning. And that's just from my experience. I'm not an engineer, but I feel like anyone who goes to any type of research program and to this level, you have to learn how to take critical feedback. You have to build that resilience. You have to understand what it means to be transformed into a different type of learner, a different type of person. Do our minority students have a harder time with this? Yes, because they're already in this system of being microaggressed. They're already in this, have this notion that they're not, top tier, going to be top tier. They're, it's all these other negatives that play into that. So I don't really know, and I haven't gotten to that. I wish, if you all have feedback and tell me how to bring all that, building resilience, understanding transformation, but also dealing with accepting this, those failures and feedback and turning that into not that negative, big impact on the mental health, this experience of becoming a doctoral or a PhD or an engineer or anyone in the STEM field. Like, how do you transform all of that without it being in this negative space and still saying, well, you have to be resilient, you have to persist through, and, you just keep pushing through, and, so that's my question.
I had a comment about that, but Colin, did you want to go?
No, go ahead, Sunny.
I was just going to say, in regard to what Kim just said, I think it's important to separate what is normal to the PhD experience and what is not. So it's normal to get your paper rejected the first time. It's normal to not get every fellowship you apply for. What's not normal is verbal abuse, sexual harassment, things like that. And so I think once we make clear the delineations between like an acceptable experience and not one, that's when we can give better advice to our students.
I want to say one way I try to demonstrate this to people in my lab is, like, I keep a list of grant rejections. So I think it's very easy to see someone who's being successful and just think that they're a natural or something, but it maybe touches on vulnerability, which I think is a key aspect in making grad students feel welcome. But I'll show them, okay, you see that I have this K99, but the last 10 grants before that was just no, and this is the process. Like, this is a normal thing. Showing them that I haven't internalized it as a personal failure, but that's part of the process in developing.
Yeah, so there was a comment about stereotype threat. Yeah, and I see that, and I just put a wiki thing. It's sort of, there's a stereotype, if you're a certain group and there's a stereotype, and then sort of something happens that is sort of, maybe it naturally would have happened, but it feels like, oh, well, it's because I'm a Black woman, I didn't do this, because there's already a stereotype that Black women, I mean, the fact that they have a whole book called Presumed Incompetent about women of color and their experiences in the classroom. I haven't even read the book, y'all, but I know what's in it. I know what the research is. And there were times when I was a pre-tenure faculty, if I didn't do something right in the classroom, I would feel it. I would feel that stereotype threat. And granted, my colleagues, and this is something else. So being on the other side of the table, there was the side of the table where I was pre-tenure and not even a professor. And there was the other side that I'm a professor and saw things on that side of the table that I would have never, as a student, I didn't know existed. So for example, you would think that if I had hundreds of students a year, the ones coming to my office with the tears and would be the women, the underrepresented groups, and that was never the case. Those were not the ones that would come, not to say that it was wrong, but the ones that were in my office in tears, and it wasn't pity tears, like stressed, and were not the women, the underrepresented groups. I would have never known that. I would just assume that, yeah, we're struggling. I'm struggling because we struggle. Everybody struggles. So I began to see that most of the time, when you think that you're going through something by yourself or you're having a hard time, it has nothing to do with you being a woman, a man, or whatever. It's a PhD journey problem or a class problem. Maybe it's a class and everyone struggles, or some people are good at hiding their struggle. They come into class and they're like, oh no, I've got it all figured out. Meanwhile, they had a network of like 20 people they worked with on the weekend, but they don't have to disclose that. They just come and like, hey, I did it, right? So I just share all that to say, we have to normalize, and I think that's the other thing, the engineering piece that Memuna mentioned. I had a feeling it wasn't. I had to ask, was it mixed disciplines or engineers? And I just feel like culturally, engineering, the discipline, the fact that, so I went to RPI, and the fact that in 1826, it was noted as the first university to offer engineering to civilians, right? The engineering has a military root. It wasn't always something that people could get access to learn. And so I feel like engineering carries with it, and I think there's some literature on it. It carries, there's residue from its origins still in the discipline. Some of that militaristic kind of, you know, be strong and muscle through. I mean, disciplines like engineering, sub-disciplines like engineering education, which is newer, I find that naturally has a little bit more of a human, sort of human-centered focus, and very much people-oriented, people-considerate, compared to, let's say, mechanical engineering. And I've been in mechanical engineering spaces since like 1995. So I've seen it all, right? And it's just sort of a certain way of being. If we had an anthropologist break it down, we could study how mechanical engineers function. And you can see that there's these cultural things that are there, ways of talking, being, all of that. And it kind of aligns with what some of Memuni's findings were. Memuni's findings about, you don't talk about soft stuff, like soft stuff. That's just, it's not normalized in those spaces. It's about business, it's about numbers, it's about getting the work done. It's only the individuals in that system that bring their own personalities where you see some of this changing. If I misspoke, I welcome anyone to correct me if I'm wrong here. So that's just my my thought.
What
Other comments? Yes, please.
Here, could I say something to Kim's comment about resilience? I do think it's important for people to build resilience, right? And that's a lot of times work that we're doing with people. But I also want to caution us to be careful, because resilience gets used as a bat that we beat people over the head with. Okay, well, you know, something happened that feels uncomfortable. Well, come on, be resilient, right? And sometimes we have to pause and give people space to, like, can I process what just happened? Can I be a little disappointed? Can I be a little frustrated? Can I have this moment? Yes, I'm going to get back up, but I also need to honor what has happened and why I think it happened and what's going on for me. So just, resilience is about bouncing back, but I think sometimes what gets lost is the moment before we bounce back, of sort of like, you know, falling down. And like, it doesn't mean that people won't get back up, but we do want to give them the space for the things that have been hurtful.
Michael, did you want to come off mute, or did you want me to? Yeah, I'm reading your comment. Did you want to come off mute to share and talk more, or?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for this discussion. I appreciate it. Yeah, this has been very insightful. I will say, though, that, yeah, I definitely think there's more of an emphasis on soft skills. You know, so one of the things that we do a lot in computer science is this project management. And, you know, some students want to measure the success by lines of code, or, you know, how challenging their project was that they wrote. But yeah, one of the metrics that I have continually heard from the hiring recruiters is just when they're looking for new hires, they want to see people who are versed in the soft skills and the people skills, you know, that they have compassion for one another, they can communicate. You know, we oftentimes in computer science say that, you know, the clients are really ignorant. They don't understand what they're asking for. And so it's our job to sort of translate that. But, you know, doing that in a compassionate way, I think, because sometimes there's an emphasis on, well, this is the most efficient and elegant way to do that. Yeah, and I think it's easy to, at least in my own experience, I found that the more time I focus online trying to solve logic problems, the more detached from humanity that I am, and the less empathetic I am towards other people. So I do think it's an important skill that we are trying to emphasize more in, you know, soft skills is one of our main program skills that we are trying to make sure our graduates are distinguished by. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to add that comment. Didn't mean to hijack the discussion here, but I'm very much enjoying it. Thank you.
No, you didn't hijack. You added to the discussion, and you're welcome to do that. We encourage engagement, so thank you so much. Okay. I see your comment, Elizabeth. Any other comments from the audience? Questions? Okay, looks like we're getting to a natural pausing point. I don't know, Bree, if you had any announcements or other things that you wanted to share.
No, this is actually our last virtual session for the spring. So if anything, I just thank everybody for coming, especially our panelists and our moderator, for sharing your experiences. And lastly, we have a survey that will pop up on your screen once you exit the Zoom. So please fill that out, because that'll help us know how we need to improve. And we can also share your input to the panelists and the moderator as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming. Thanks again to the panel. Keep talking at your institutions, get together with people and continue the conversation. So thank you so much, and have a good rest of the day and a great weekend. Good end of semester for those that are wrapping up semesters. How can we follow up with the panelists if we want? I'll put my email in the chat right now. You could email me directly, and if you want to connect with some of the others, yeah. If you're open to getting emails, panelists, you could put it in there. If you need a filter, they could email me. Okay, emails are in the chat. So, okay. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming, and we give you back 7 minutes of your time today. No one's mad when meetings end early.